call this meeting to order. The camera's on. Okay. All right. Thank you all for coming. There might be other people jumping onto Zoom as we go through the night. And hopefully they will join us for the discussion. That being said, the first order of business before we get into it, I just want to confirm, make a motion to confirm our minutes from last time on December 5th. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. So we're here obviously to talk about the woolly adelgid, in particular pertaining to waterways, Stockbridge Bowl, otherwise. First thing I wanted to do before we get into it is just make sure everyone has a basic understanding. I think a lot of us know what the woolly adelgid is, being that we've worked with it, but identifying it on hemlock trees, basically looking for that cotton ball structure that they build underneath the branches that causes them to be able to live through our winters. And they are able to seemingly stay longer, live longer and longer through our winters. So first thing I'd like to open up to basically us first. If we could have a description of what we see is happening on the hemlocks. We can talk about Ice Glen. We can talk about what we're thinking about the bowl. But if anyone had first thoughts that they wanted to share.
Well, I think the reason we wanted to have this meeting was because just anecdotally, we don't have hard numbers, but on many of the site visits to Stockbridge Bowl, when there are hemlocks on the property, I'd say almost all the time we see that the hemlocks are infested. Some are slightly infested and some are badly infested. So it's raised the question on the Conservation Commission, what's going to happen on the bowl when we start to lose those trees? And, I'd say too that the ash borer is there too. And some homeowners have already cut down their ash trees or have dead ash trees that are on the bowl. So there's going to be quite a bit of loss.
I'm also thinking that it wouldn't be outrageous to think that there is probably like elongated scale accompanying all of this too, as the trees get stressed, more stressed.
Yep.
One thing that Lisa printed out here, and I'll make sure Eric, you get a copy of this. We just printed out from the New York State Department a brief overview of the hemlock woolly adelgid. Description, it's where it's located, it's pertaining mostly to New York, but they had really good descriptions. So I'll make sure you get a copy of that. Some things that I looked up from what I found pertaining to the woolly adelgid in waterways were some people talking about the habitat loss, particularly to the critters, the animals and stuff like that, but also in terms of water, was the shading effect, the habitat it creates by cooling the waterways as just a canopy, cooling the forest, keeping it humid. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't know. And one question I have, I don't know if anybody here knows the answer, the percentage of the forested area that is hemlock on the bowl. But I think from that most recent report from the Stockbridge Bowl Association, I think they said 72% of the bowl is forested, which is quite a lot. So depending on the component of hemlock, it's going to have a significant impact.
72%?
Is that accurate? I think so.
But that's not
Maybe
from hemlock, that's just.
No, not hemlock, but 72% of the area around the bowl is forested.
And also depending on ash,
and
if it's ash, hemlock, anything that's being really hit hard right now. I think too, and you know, obviously a lot of people here know about the woolly delgid, but I think one discussion or something that we really thought of ahead of time was how do we get ahead or what are we doing to get ahead? Because obviously we're about 50 years behind planning for this day. Once it arrived in, Virginia? And what does the climate look like ahead of us? Because I think a lot of what we're seeing is these trees potentially dying if they get infected. If we don't have a harsh winter like we used to, a lot of these trees probably will die. And if they're really infected, I saw estimates of 4 years, but they can live maybe 10 plus years if it's not a super bad infection. There was a wide range of data I found out there. But what do we do when they do die? And what are we talking about with the public when their hemlock on their property gets affected? And this, I'm open this up to anyone here that had thoughts.
Well, I ran across a passage about this in a book called, I think, I'm just looking for the title, Forests and Times, the Environmental Consequences.
If you want to just speak up, I think people.
say your name too, Tom.
Sure. Tom Lobel, Conservation Commission. This is from Forests in Time, Environmental Consequences of 1,000 Years of Change in New England by David R. Foster. I think you know him. Put out by Yale University Press. And he says, as the dense hemlock canopies thin, began to break up, light levels near the ground increased dramatically. And the forests are rapidly colonized with seedlings of black birch, red maple, and oak, as well as weedy herbs and shrubs, including pokeweed, fireweed, raspberry, and ferns. So it does seem as if there's a natural succession there. That's all I could actually find on what would be the natural succession. But also I think sugar maples are growing companion plants with hemlocks. Mm-hmm. But of course, as he says somewhere else, these trees are basically irreplaceable. Ecologically, they're irreplaceable. There's nothing that you're going to find that provides the same ecological services or habitat for wildlife. Nothing is going to be the same. So far, at least, it looks inevitable that they will be gone.
Yeah.
But
I would add invasives to that list.
Invasives are almost,
especially on the bowl, we see all the time. That's what's moving in quickest.
We have a raised hand, Peter. Will you just state where you're from?
Sure. Thank you. I don't know how well, hopefully you can hear me well. My name is Pete Grima. I work for DCR as a service forester, and mostly 10 years in North County. And some of you may know Tom Ryan. He was a service forester in South Berkshire for almost 20 years and recently took another position. So I've been covering South Berkshire, which brings me to you today. We also have Tom's replacement here for those of you who are interested. Colin is on the call too. But I appreciate that quote you just read from David Foster, but I did want to qualify it with some of my own observations that it's really, I've seen hemlock decline in the Connecticut Valley for the last 15 years, and it's really a very gradual, but very prominent phenomenon where you're basically seeing a total shift in the composition, not wholesale loss of hemlock, but just, a lot of loss of especially older trees. And places like Mount Toby, where there is a rich bedrock, you do see a lot of sugar maple coming in. So I anticipate that being something that's probably going to be more prevalent in your situation than say oak or red maple. Sugar maple just loves the soils down in the Marble Valley. But that, that very gradual decade to 2 decade long transition is it's very interesting. It's basically it's a very natural transition. It's very different than what you would do if you were to do an abrupt, forced transition with a harvest, like a timber harvest type situation, which can get, that might. I think I had a very detailed email. I think I sent to Sally. I don't know. I don't know any of the commissioners, so I don't know if Sally is in the room. Is one of you, Sally, by any chance?
Yes.
No. Okay.
She's here.
Where, I anticipate black birch, sugar maple being important components as things change. Is that we've seen it happen already. And one other thing I did want to add is, usually with landowners, if we're seeing dying trees, the impetus is either you're going to salvage value, or you're concerned about hazard trees, or you're concerned about invasives that are going to take over as the light increases. So those are the 3 key points, which I think are probably forefront of your minds also. So happy to discuss those things too from the forestry standpoint.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Peter, it's Sally. I have 2 questions about what you just said. Number one, well, one is a comment. If the hemlocks are being replaced by deciduous trees, that's a whole different world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my understanding that the sugar maple is also under threat of climate, that it has, it does not like the warm weather that's coming. So if one of the trees that's replacing the hemlocks in the forests is not only a non-deciduous, or is a deciduous tree as opposed to a non-deciduous tree, and it is equally under threat, then I think we've got a bigger problem than we are looking at.
If I may, so there's some mixed messaging on sugar maple about being climate vulnerable. It's the Achilles heel of sugar maple is drought. So on a site that's not well buffered from drought, existing sugar maple will be stressed and additionally. But I've thought about this quite a bit because we have very loamy soils in the Berkshires. We have a lot of CP sites where sugar maple does really well that are naturally buffered from drought. So I don't, that's the biggest thing that would threaten sugar maple in a warmer, drier climate. So I don't see it as ranking as vulnerable as hemlock climate-wise in Berkshire County, especially down in the valleys. But there is a little bit of back and forth on how sugar maple is going to fare. But it does exist well south of us at low elevation in what, like the cove forests of the Southern Appalachians, which are very rich, very moisture intensive environments where they're buffered from drought. So I think sugar maple is probably going to do okay. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the Stockbridge poll personally, so I can't, being on the ground would be the best way to answer your question. But I think that was the gist of my rebuttal. Thank you, Sally, though.
Well, and I think you both bring up a great point, though, too, of the risk of it all with, Peter talking about the maple necessarily mixed messaging about it, but drought wise, the climate models that the little bit that I've searched and looked around and stuff, we're in a funny, unique situation where it sounds like we're going to get a lot of rain, but it's coming so fast that the ground isn't going to be able to take it. So we're going to have a lot more of I feel like this summer was a really good example. We got a lot of rain really quickly, and then it wasn't there for a while. So if you look at the average for the month, you're like, oh, we got close to about what we need. But it was so quick and so fast that we weren't able to retain it. And I know as being on the farm, it was really dry. And then all of a sudden we got about 3 inches of rain and we were, oh, thank goodness. But then that was it for a while. So looking at trees that are migrating north to south and that also have that deciduous component versus non-deciduous component, are we, we've been going back and forth about what trees do we plant? So do we recommend another deciduous tree for a deciduous tree? And do we look for trees that are southern of us and start, doing a little bit of each, hedging our bets, recommending that if you can replace it with another tree that's already on your property, if it's a sugar maple or a hemlock, or do we say like, we're looking at these trees now, which is, obviously something I don't think we necessarily have to answer today. But I think it's something that, I just remember the last conservation workshop I went to, and this was like 7 years ago. And this was the debate they were having there. And it was, looking at 2040 was that like, we're going to have a climate that's more looking like the mid-Atlantic than the Northeast. And now it's 7 years later and we're
heading there.
we're very close. It's starting to feel like.
And, I think the other thing that's important to remember is this is not a natural forest. These are all small, privately owned plots. And some of them are real small. So what people choose to plant is going to be different all over the place. It's not like sugar maple will naturally move in and that's what will be there. People are going to plant as these trees come down.
And obviously too, I think this is, some of the recommendations that I found for the hemlocks, a lot talking about getting rid of infested trees. And, at what point do you get rid of it? If it's a hazard, like we just mentioned. Also looking, around the bowl, I don't know what the rules are and stuff. I don't know what people are doing for fertilizing, if any at all on their properties. I'm guessing no.
Shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be. So I hope not. But they said, not using fertilizer near trees that are infected because that has shown evidence of supporting the bugs and helping them a lot more than hurting them. I heard recommendations of moving bird feeders off so birds aren't, congregating there. I don't know how much that will help. I mean, birds are going to go wherever they want, but.
I did read that birds are one of the mechanisms for transporting them.
Which, there you go.
Correct.
Yep, that's a possibility.
Right.
Yeah. And then it got down to people that were recommending, and this is from the Cornell handout, horticultural oil for small trees. If it's a tiny tree that you can easily reach with a sprayer, then they were not like 100-foot tall one. You're not going to spray a 100-foot tall tree with horticultural oil. But again, that gets into spraying and chemicals, which
Close to the.
you're not going to do near a lake. That I don't feel like recommending anyone do that. And then it gets into another thing is just the other pests. Like we do have the borer, the ash borer. So we have hemlocks, we have ashes, the elongated scale. Are there other pests that we've really heard come up around the bowl?
I think so.
You have somebody with their hand up.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, sorry. So this is Jess Toro.
Oh,
Hey, Jeff.
Hi. I'll make it quick and then I have to jump off and do childcare. So I think, there's a couple ways that you can really drive at, the role that hemlock plays, particularly around the bowl. So it's pretty easy to do an analysis where you're looking for that evergreen cover and you can pick out white pine versus hemlock pretty easily when it's digitized. But my guess is if I really had to kind of think about what type of role the hemlock plays, the hemlock is probably playing a greater role in the feeder streams to the Stockbridge Bowl than the actual bowl itself. The bowl's temperature and dissolved oxygen and health is so much more dynamic and based on kind of lake dynamics and kind of how that mixing occurs, that the hemlock is really not playing an important role in kind of overall temperature and shading on the bowl directly, so like aquatically directly. But what it's definitely playing a role in is all the feeder streams, particularly probably on the north side, so more like Gould Meadows, Hanglewood, Mackinac, Bullard Woods, any of those feeder streams, it's going to have a much more important role because it's keeping lower stream temperatures as they enter the bowl. And being kind of on that north aspect, also in conservation, you're going to have that kind of cooler regime. So the water inputs on the north side of the bowl are probably cooler than they are in the southern side where it's more developed, also more fragmented. Also in kind of, when you think about development on the east, south, and west sides of the bowl, in general, your forest type is much more mixed and less kind of dependent on the hemlocks. So I think some of the things to kind of drive, instead of thinking about the bowl holistically, really kind of figure out where your hemlock's most influencing kind of your overall habitat characteristics. And again, I would look at the feeder streams. So you're probably going to look at Shadow Brook. You're going to look at the stream coming out of Tree Farm Road. You're going to look at the smaller stream system coming through Bullard. And then maybe kind of looking around Lily Pond and seeing if that had, I don't recall a lot of hemlock around Lily Pond, but that might be the other feeder stream. But I think you have too much daylighting or too much surface light hitting Lily Pond that I doubt the hemlocks would really kind of dictate the temperature of the water and the dissolved oxygen and kind of overall habitat.
You have to also consider the Housatonic though, Jess.
So hemlocks don't really play a very big role on the Housatonic River. It's not a floodplain typical species. Hemlocks play more of a role in our wetlands than in our floodplain forests. Floodplain forests are typically dominated by deciduous trees. You've got your cottonwood, your sycamore, your white ash, your red maple. So it's not really a heavy hemlock component. What you're really looking for is kind of slope aspect, ravines, waterways, versus kind of overall kind of like the bowl holistically, if that makes sense. Oh, and the other thing is, sorry, climate projections that could really impact Stockbridge in the next 10 years, which you referenced. So it is this like kind of intense rain events that are going to become the summertime is going to be more influenced by actually drought and daytime temperatures above 90. That's going to be one of our bigger driving kind of climate change. We're going to have more days over 90, which is usually associated with drought, as you were kind of talking about. In our summer times, we tend to have sporadic rain events anyways, where you'd have kind of less soaking rains over multiple days, but these kind of afternoon rainstorms. So those might be a little bit more intense, but generally our summertime changes will be driven more by that increased temperature over 90 and drought. The winter time is where you're going to see, instead of nor'easters and snow, you're going to see a lot more heavy storm events in the form of liquid precipitation, not frozen. And so that will have icing, will have a huge impact on hemlocks, especially if they're dying or stressed. Any stress tree is going to, when covered with ice, going to become a problem. You'll also see these kind of micro event occurrences with, where it isn't supposed to ice or sleet, but it will, because of kind of how our mountains act in the wintertime in terms of our storm events. So I'd really think about kind of wintertime ice, precipitation on frozen ground, partially frozen ground, a lot of sediment movement. And then summertime, I think the drivers are really going to be drought and over 90.
Do you have thoughts on replanting as hemlock's lost in those places where you identified?
So we do reforestation. A lot of our reforestation can occur, in sites where canopy, think of, so like Moose is on, he and I have been talking about kind of thinking about closing in the canopy at Bullard Woods after the kiwi control there, because we lost so much canopy and other reasons for losing canopy. But that's not driven by hemlocks in particular. It's driven by the invasive species on site and surrounding it, and the lack of canopy due to these microburst events, the hardy kiwi pulling down trees, dead and dying disease trees, ash, you name it. And then we do a lot of floodplain forest replanting. So a little bit different than what you guys were saying. We tend to look at reference sites. We don't introduce species from the south that aren't found here already. But we make sure the suite of species that we are planting have southern components and are kind of climate ready, as they say. Some people do already bring up southern species. We just don't completely know how composition will balance itself out.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, that's
Thank
huge.
you.
Thank you. I know Bullard Woods was mentioned, and I think Moose is on. If Moose, you're out there and you wanted to say anything about Bullard Woods. If not, that's okay. I'll take that as a no. Raise your hand if you do want to mention anything. I can see you now.
Jess excuse me, Jess has her hand up again.
Sorry, and then I'll lower it. So the other thing to think about, and Pete is probably a little bit better at this than I am, is when you're thinking about replacement species. So you think like ash died faster with the emerald ash borer. It had like a 3 to 5 time horizon. Obviously, hemlock woolly adelgid, we're seeing a much longer time horizon that we're seeing loss of hemlock. You really want to kind of think about how that species that you're trying to replace functions compositionally and structurally. So what role does it play in these forest ecotypes? And then, how does it act vertically and horizontally in terms of structure in the forest? Certain species are obviously very large in terms of, like dominant canopy species, your oak, your ash, you want that broad canopy branching. And then other species play a little bit less of a role. So really kind of think about how you're going to find that. And when we replace ash, a lot of times we replace the overall composition of it with multiple species to try to get at some of that composition and structure, specifically structure. And yeah, so it's not really kind of, there's no one for, like you plant this species because you've lost ash. It's just kind of not that simple. When we think about replacing hemlock, it's in a wetland. Tamaracks and white pines, although very different, can offer some of this similar characteristics. So you kind of have to mix things in together. It's not as easy as just a single replacement species.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yes,
Pete?
liking everything Jess is saying. I wanted to add a few things though that, I'm starting to dabble in making planting recommendations myself. And, Berkshire County, the state of Massachusetts is pretty diverse. And we don't have to look far for examples of more southern mixtures of species that are functioning as a system already. One that keeps coming up for ash replacement is tulip poplar, which, in the southern Appalachians, sugar maple, basswood, white ash, tulip poplar, these are already co-occurring in habitats that are very analogous to some of those rich sugar maple ash forests we have in the Berkshires. And tulip poplar is native to Berkshire County. I've never seen it in the Berkshires myself. I think it shows up way down, and it's in the Connecticut Valley very sparingly, especially if you get down towards the Connecticut border. So that's, it's already on the edge, and it's not a stretch of the imagination. In North County, we have a strong there's a dearth of oaks and hickories. Really only have red oak, bitternut hickory, with very few exceptions. So just, using our other native oaks and hickories to diversify that and bolster that in a planting situation it's not a stretch of the imagination. They're around, they're in the county, they're just not prevalent in the Berkshires yet, because by and large, Berkshire County has a more northern feel than the rest of the state. And you don't have to go far, just hop over the plateau into the Connecticut Valley. You have much more southern ecosystems with different species they're present but not prevalent. So those, that's easy to augment, or they call it enrichment of the system. There's the components that don't exist yet. You can introduce them into a stand or near a stand, and then they become at least possible in the mix. So it's easy to imagine, and it's also kind of exciting to think about doing some simple things to point this in the right trajectory.
If you don't mind me saying one other thing, I think Peter was kind of getting at this a little bit, and I find this saying kind of helps if it takes a little while to sink in. But a forest ecologist, Mark Anderson, talked a lot about thinking about with climate change that you have a stage and your actors will change depending on the environmental conditions of that stage. And so your stage is your geology, your soils, the pH, half of Stockbridge is calcareous and the other half isn't. You have this very kind of stage that will dictate what does well on it, but the characters will change, especially with climate change and some of these environmental conditions. So although in general, what I was saying is that we're not stretching really far with our kind of boundaries for our reforestation, typically because a lot of times it's mitigation and it has, kind of DP defined aspects to it that we're trying to fix. Thinking about the fact that you've got the stage and things will change. Now, it isn't to say you need to give up and just kind of let it all go crazy. But, thinking about what can exist on site based on your kind of environmental conditions is important to make sure kind of the forest works. And as those characters come in and out with climate change, that they're all kind of playing a role. It doesn't have to be the same thing. So, and I mean, that just feeds into what Peter was saying with tulip poplar. It is something that's here in kind of lesser amounts, but we are playing with it and bringing it in more because it may play a much greater role than it has so far.
Oh, that's huge.
That's great.
And I think this speaks to something that we're trying to put together, recommendations / a pamphlet for people to grab and have, at town hall, because that's what our mission is, to get this information out into the right hands and people can make the decisions. And if any resources that you have put together or putting together like a recommendation list that we can use and have as something to point to, would be greatly, really greatly received here. Jess, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Sorry, Peter actually hopefully can give you more information on it. But DCR is rolling out a new forest management planning process. So the state helps landowner that have over 10 acres. Am I right? 10 acres of forest land. Is 10 acres? 7?
Yeah.
Okay, 7 acres of forest land. Plus you can have associated fields and other habitat. They help pay landowners to get forest management plans. Now they're rolling out a forest management plan with a climate resilience component that foresters are now applying for, and they might have great information. But for any landowner who comes to us, the first thing we recommend is a forest stewardship plan if they're eligible, because, and it has nothing to do with me, we don't do it, but it is such a great snapshot of people's land, and especially with its climate resilience component, I think it's a powerful tool that the state is providing.
So would the small plots on Stockbridge Bowl be eligible?
No, I mean, I think most of those plots, some of those landowners have come to us and they're like half acres, so no. But anyone who has over 7 acres of forest land would be eligible. And I think we don't talk about it enough in Stockbridge and promote landowners getting them. I think a lot of people think it's about cutting, and it's not. It doesn't require cutting. It's just a really great snapshot done by very smart foresters who have been doing this for long periods of time, coming onto your land and telling you what you have and where your hemlocks are and where other issues might be. So I just highly recommend encouraging landowners to get it.
If one of you could send the information to probably Matt, we can put it on the website for the Forest and Cultural Commission. Yeah.
One caveat is it's not rolled out statewide yet, so that's why I was deliberating whether to bring it up today. But
we're looking forward to it then.
Yeah, it's supposed to be imminent, in terms of becoming statewide, but I don't want to say that that's going to happen and have it not happen. But
irregardless of the climate part, you could still get a forest stewardship plan, and you could do one for the birds.
Yes.
Peter's just saying the climate part may not be.
Right. Or even better, I always say call your service forester first and get the free walk, because we can talk. Sometimes, I'd say 2 out of 10 times a landowner just wants whatever I have to tell them, and then they have information, they know who to talk to if they want to act on it. Not everybody ends up getting a plan because this might not be what they want or need at the time, but they can always call us and we can point them in whatever direction makes sense for them.
So does that free walk include town forest?
I walk with anybody that owns woods.
All right, we'll call you.
Okay.
Yes, and my successor here, Colin, who's listening in, is probably grimacing that I just volunteered him for work when he's only on his 5th day of work. But
we'll give him a couple of weeks.
Couple days. We'll give him a couple days.
Yeah.
And Lisa, the service foresters have been out, part of the town planning with Ice Glen. They got a forest management plan, the Laurel Hillsides, but also Gould Meadows has one. I believe, Moose could correct me, Bullard Woods. So a lot of conservation lands in Stockbridge, which is unusual, have these forest management plans. I think it's really on the private side. I don't think people realize how awesome DCR is as a resource.
Thank you.
That's great. So with that recentering, I want to open up, anything that people have thought about that hasn't been brought up yet, pertaining to the bowl, waterways, hemlocks, invasives, if anything that's come to mind. We've gotten a lot of really good information, I think, from Peter or Pete and Jess. So I just want to invite anything else that someone has, thinks we're missing in this conversation. I'll give it back to Pete. Pete's got something.
I'll happily defer if I've had more than my time, but one thing about hemlock I've noticed is that in some parts of the state, it seems to be, I really can't say until I see a site and walk it, but it seems to be artificially abundant in a particular stand due to past harvesting practices. Many things were clear cut, say roughly 100 years ago. And if there were lots of little hemlocks underneath, say, an oak forest or mixed oak forest, then all those little hemlocks are now our hemlock mixed forests now. They were just sort of in the way or too small, and they got passed over and they became bigger and took over. And in between 100 years ago and now, maybe there was one high grade timber harvest where they cut out all the big oak and maple and passed by the hemlock, and then those hemlocks then become even more prevalent. So I've seen situations where hemlock is more abundant than it probably naturally would be in the absence of past exploitative harvesting practices. So not necessarily all hemlock decline is the worst thing in the world. I mean, I've seen some places where you actually get almost like an ecological restoration effect by having hemlock decline. And then all of a sudden, in the understory, you see all these wildflowers that have been shaded out by hemlock that were in the seed bank from a previous forest type, say sugar maple, maybe with some hemlock in there, but rich sugar maple forest type. And the hemlock has just been so densely shading the site that it's been suppressing all these wildflowers for, 100 years. And now that hemlock has had its time in the sun and is senescing out due to various reasons, suddenly you have this community reappearing that was actually previously there. So really seeing that on the ground and assessing the natural community with muddy boots is the best way to sort of figure out what you're dealing with. But I want to at least float that concept that, not every hemlock is necessarily naturally, I don't want to say shouldn't be there, but there's a reason why it's there, and it might be artificial, might be human activities that created that situation. But thank you.
All right. Give it a moment for everyone to think about anything else. So that being said, I think for our end, which, we got notified about grants for pamphlets that I think we missed the deadline on because we weren't ready to do it. But I think now I feel like this is a good one that we could put a nice Stockbridge oriented pamphlet together with some recommendations pertaining to, we could have a special one for the bowl and maybe a special one for properties not in the bowl. I don't know how we would organize it, but this is, I think, what we could take on as one project this year in concert with the CONCOM and other groups, other associations, and get the word out and hopefully get the money for that. That being said, I want to just thank, first of all the great information from Jess and
really
Pete
helpful
for attending. Huge, lot of stuff to think about in that. So thank you all.
And Colin, we'll be calling you.
Yeah, get ready. All right. Anything else? We're good. Okay. I want to thank everyone in the room too for showing up and listening and contributing. We'll move on. We just have one small item on our to-do list. It's setting a date for a town forest visit.
Yeah, and I had just put that on hold,
Yeah.
you know, through the holiday.
Mhm.
So, you know, I'll get back in touch with Jeff Jordan and also Mike Buffoni.
Perfect. And now we got,
And maybe DCR.
Oh, yeah,
now we can add that to the list.
yeah.
But if the weather keeps up like this, you know, see what they say, you know, February, March,
Yeah.
before the season really gets going for farming.
So, you can make sure, unless you already have it.
I don't have
Okay, we need name and contact info for Colin.
I have it on my list to get you that. He doesn't have a phone yet, but I can get you his email.
Oh, great. Yeah, we're coming after him.
Thank you.
That would be great. So we'll figure that out. All right, and then for our next meeting, it'll be on the earlier, well, actually, I don't know,
February 6th, it looks like.
February 6th, yeah. How's that square with everyone? That'd be good. And then we can review some of this, talk about some stuff that we haven't talked about in a minute. And we'll do the same time, same place. All right. All right. Anything else I'm forgetting before? Eric, thank you for paying attention to those hands. I couldn't see them originally. All right. That being said, I'll make a motion to call this meeting to a close. Do I hear a second? Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.